Welcome, everyone. Um, my name is Michael Fitzsimons. I'm the Director of Research Programs and Business Development at the Center for Translational Data Science. And thanks for coming to the latest in our Gen3 Community Forum series. Today is focused solely on the introduction of the soon-to-be-released Gen3 Frontend Framework, which we're really excited to share with you today. Um, Other sponsors of this series include the Open Commons Consortium, the Australian Biocommons, and the New Zealand eScience Infrastructure. Just a little bit of other housekeeping. So this is being recorded. I will provide the slides and the recording in the next couple of days on the gen3.org page. Please remain on mute throughout. At the end, if you want to raise your hand to ask questions, or feel free to ask questions in the chat throughout, and we'll try to get to them during the talk or certainly after. I think there should be some time for some significant Q&A. I think that's everything. What I'm going to do is turn it over to Bob Grossman for a short introduction, and then Craig Barnes will do the majority of the presentation. Take it away, Bob.
So I want to welcome everyone to this Gen3 Community Forum. We're very excited to be able to, at this venue, announce the Gen3 Frontend Framework and the Gen3 Analysis Tool Framework. I think this will be, over time, a much easier way for people to customize Gen3 portals, to extend Gen3 portals in a way that makes sense for your organization, and to maintain the Gen3 portals over time. In a few weeks at the Supercomputing Conference will be the first sort of core basic release of this. I'm going to let Craig go through the details. We're hoping that sometime in January, you'll be able to sort of bring up a basic comments, but I'm going to let Craig talk through the rollout. But I think this is a major step forward for Gen3. We're thinking of this as part of what we're calling Gen 3.2, the sort of first major release of Gen3 in terms of major new functionality since Gen3 was developed several years ago. Of course, we've had many releases of the different components of Gen3. If you look at the bottom of every of any Gen3 portal, you could see the dictionary and the other services and their version numbers. There's been a lot of work, but this is sort of a radical rethinking of what Gen3 looks like. And you'll see some other announcements coming up. Over to you, Craig, to sort of talk in detail about the Gen3 Frontend Framework and Analysis Tool Framework.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Once again, welcome everyone. Thank you for your interest in this. We're pretty excited to talk about this. I think it's the first time it's really been presented in a large audience. So looking forward to talking about it and getting some questions and feedback, and and go from there. So next slide, please. So as Bob mentioned, we have the Gen3 software. Gen3 Data Commons has a UI or a front end that talks to all the various services and allows you to do things like searching and discovery, and run notebooks, run some analysis tools, and it's flexible enough to be able to power a lot of different types of commons, a lot of different types of data, and it's configurable enough that you can kind of pick and choose the things you want to do, and it's been our front end for quite a while. And we used to call it windmill. We now kind of call it data portal, but those two terms get interchanged some. So, if I mention windmill, I mean data portal. And so we'll go from there. Next slide, please. So, nice thing about Windmill has some nice strengths. It's highly configurable, and so as we saw, it can support a wide different commons. Um, it has a lot of it's not completely white labeled, but it's very close to the point that you can define your own styling, theming, fonts, colors, iconography to some extent. And that's great. Also, it's nicely tightly coupled with Gen3 services, so it interacts very well with Gen3 services. They're built in. It knows what the responses are. It knows how the APIs work. As we do changes to Gen3 services, the API, of course, will adjust for that. And so it's maintained data commons and runs them quite well for quite a long time. It does have some weaknesses though. And part of it is its monolithic architecture, and it's kind of like the giant kitchen sink or the giant drawer in your kitchen where you throw all the miscellaneous things, and so it starts over time. It start develop a lot of competing features. There's a couple redundancies. There's some things in there that make it a little harder to kind of necessarily not maintain, but extending can be challenging. I think it's also hard to sometimes run. Deployment's a little hard too. So since it's one size fits all, we deploy from a common configuration, and so that can be somewhat difficult. The other one that happens is a lot of times because we have so many projects, sometimes some of these use cases get embedded into the code, into the component, and which is not always bad, but sometimes we have to be careful that turning something on doesn't disable something else. So that's something that we want to try to address with that. There's some difficulty in moving data movement between pages. So one of the ideas behind this is you'll be able to find data and be able to sort of, use various different tools to be able to move data between them. And so some of that is a little more behind the scenes than I think we would like in a UI. So we're trying to address that. And then the development environment is not horrible, but it's also not it can be somewhat complex and maybe sometimes a little frustrating. We'll mention Helm charts. We're starting to move over to those, so we're trying to support that as well. So we'll go from there. Next slide, please. So to address that, we've decided to do what we call the Gen3 Frontend Framework. And the idea is designed to be a gentle replacement for, and I'll say gentle for Gen3, the Gen3 data portal, and we'll explain what that means. Trying to address some of the limitations I mentioned, try to improve the development experience and the overall user experience, update the technology stack, and we try to enhance things like its performance, the ability to add custom content, and that's kind of key, in other applications. So, we provide a nice core set of applications, but you may want to at some point add something else. And so this will become hopefully much easier to do. And we also want to try to really help with the deployment and maintenance of these overall sites. And so we have a plan for trying to do that, which I'll detail in this talk. Next slide, please. So here's the Gen3 front-end framework. And so we provide, so the idea is that it's kind of a layered approach. So we have the thing in orange, what we call context. The thing in orange, which we call the framework. And so what that has is a data access layer that talks to Gen3 services, has some support for talking to external services, holds some data that is either cache data from Gen3 services or other states that hang around, that are needed by the front end or some tool. We have the analysis tool framework, which is a framework for providing analysis tools that can hopefully interface almost as a plugin to Gen3. So you can hook into this, and so you want to use the Explorer to build a cohort. You can then use the analysis tool to do that, and we'll detail that going forward. And then we're also introducing the concept of context. So context is and I'll have a slide on that, but that's where it gets modeled in the framework part. And then we provide front end components, which are Gen3 components, and these are both sort of smaller contained UI components, and of course the larger sort of mega components, things like the data dictionary or the discovery page or Explorer. And so we provide those components, and then we have content management as well. So this also helps doing things with styling and configuration of the overall site. And then on top of that is the application, which is the Gen3 application or the web application that lets you actually run the site. And then any analysis tools you want there are sort of front and center on top of that. And so we're trying to make it a more layered approach, because the nice thing about that, and we'll explain some of the details of that, is that the framework can encapsulate some of the talking Gen3 services, and so things become slightly more abstract, and then becomes much easier to talk to various different parts of Gen3 and use them in a more consistent way, outside of and they're not just totally embedded in the component, or it's something you can't get access to. Next slide, please. So one of the things we talked about is context, and so the idea of context is basically it's a feature we're adding to the front end framework. And so what it does is that it allows you to, it basically stores state, but what it does is provide information about what you're doing as a user. So I'm out a user, I've gone to the Explorer page, I have an active content, or I've selected studies off the Discovery page, or I have an analysis tool. And so it knows all this. It keeps track of what the current analysis tool is. If you've saved things or you have a cohort that you've selected, it knows about that. It knows if you're logged in. It knows various different things, very state level things that then are used to drive how applications are selected for you to use to make it, to go from one application to the other, or to make changes, or to have data available from one page to the other. So context is available to all pages and all analysis tools, and it'll be something that will be, we're starting off small and be expanding as time goes on to provide more features and content. Next slide, please. So we've updated the framework. The framework has technology stack, which is somewhat new. So we'll talk about that. The data portal uses React, so we're still using React for that, just React 18, the latest version of that. Using Next.js for the full stack web. So Next.js runs the site itself. It's the application framework we're using, which gives us capability, also gives you capability for adding custom pages and custom content. We're using Redux Toolkit and SWR, which are more ways just to interact with backend services and APIs. We're trying to stay consistently written in TypeScript completely, and will be obviously compatible with JavaScript, but if you have applications that are in JavaScript, they should be fine, but we will maintain the code of Gen3 Frontend Framework in TypeScript. Theming and styling is done with Tailwind CSS, which can somewhat be a controversial decision instead of going from CSS, because the styles are inlined. We've had other projects where we've been using this, and it seems to be very successful, and we've managed to do quite some interesting things with it. So we're going to use Tailwind CSS for this. We picked a component library, one that was developed actually by some Ukrainians, and they've managed to do a blazing number of releases in the past couple of years. I think it's a well-written, we feel like it's a well-written toolkit we're using for another project. It's nicely compatible with both Next.js and Tailwind, and fairly easy to use. And if you, of course, want to, you can add your own component library, but that's the one we're using. And so you're free to use that within the Gen3 Frontend Framework. Next slide, please. So we divide the framework, as you know, in two modules. So we have the core module, which is all the data access layers and where we maintain context. We call that Gen3 Framework. Front-end module contains the components and pages, and then, as I said, we have an application template. Overall goals of the overall project and the overall design of Gen3 is to reduce code complexity, abstract some UI interactions, including those with interacting with how the UI interacts with backend services like all the Gen3. Definitely support customization and simplify the deployment. So Commons becomes something that it's your code base. You get to make, you own it, and it becomes much easier to do changes and incorporate changes into those. Next slide, please. So we'll go into the core module front-end framework a little more in detail. If anyone has questions, please feel free to ask, or I can answer a bunch at the end. It's fine either way. So as I said, provides a data interface to Gen3 services, and it's independent of components. So it has no idea what components are. All it does is it knows how to request data and get it back. And then because the way it works, It will cache some of the results, and so it can do selective. It can get data as you needed, but if the same request comes in, and it will just, since it has a cache of a local cache of the data, it'll just return that. I can do other more complex things, which we can do, but we haven't started supporting yet. Things like polling, so we can actually get dynamic updates and a few other nice features like that. It manages the user's context, like as I said, what's the current cohort or what the current selection is, selected studies, files, what your analysis tools are. So it keeps an idea of that. It allows future features such as a user command history. So the idea is, because the context is, the term watching is not the right word, but can figure out what the user interaction is. We can actually use it later on to provide a command history of what you've actually done during your session at a Gen3 site, if you want to. And these would be things like, I've used 2 analysis tools and an Explorer to find a cohort and refine it. What were those operations that happened? How has my cohort changed from each history in the command? And you can take a look at that. We kind of know how to do it. We just have not. It's a feature that will be coming. It will not be one of the first things out of the box, but it's something we're very interested in trying to support. We access Gen3 services, and we will provide it. That's the other thing, is that for developers, we have various different hooks that let you talk to various different Gen3 services. And so these hooks, if you're familiar with React, they're basically just functions that you can use to call with parameters, which we will have well defined, to let you get data in a standard way from Gen3 services. It abstracts the API calls for simplified data retrieval that we hope to maintain. The idea is, as other services change, the APIs change, we extend them. We can change the hook, we can change how we call it, we can change a little bit of the response, hopefully be additive and not subtractive, but we'll see. But the idea is that you're more isolated from changes to API calls. And this is more for people who are developing analysis tools that talk to Gen3, but it's also for us doing our development of the overall framework, so we can maintain we can handle changes in services and hopefully add new services as time goes on. And as I said, it's designed to isolate the front-end components from API changes. So that's its main responsibility. Next slide, please. We have this service called the Analysis Tool Framework, the ATF. So the idea is it'll support development of custom analysis tools. Because it's built out of core or the framework, it will actually use it to connect to Gen3 services, third-party APIs, and other data sources. So you have the ability at this point to build an analysis tool that could use Gen3 services or third-party APIs and do interesting things, whether that's data ingestion, data transformation, running AI or machine learning model on top of thing within the data that's stored in your commons. It will have the ability to support that, and of course talk to any data sources you want. Of course, that's your development, but we will provide the framework to help you start an analysis tool. And the other nice thing is we'll have an analysis center, which is where you can register your tool, and you can actually, the tools will understand the user's context. It'll look at what you've currently selected, and by registering metadata associated with each of the analysis tools, you'll be able to determine if this tool actually applies to the data that you currently have that you want to work with. And so that way you don't end up selecting or seeing tools that are not available for the data you have. On the front end, we want to be able to support and register apps as plugins, make that as simple as possible. I'm hoping to be as simple as possible as just point it to an NPM package and it should be able to go. That's ideal. I doubt it's going to be that way, but we'll try to make it as simple as possible and have example of how these are done. And as I said, we'll have the analysis tool page. Next slide, please. So on the front end, we have the front end module. And so it has a bunch of different pieces. As I said, it also has Gen3 components, but it also supports the standard Gen3 pages of discovery, exploration, data dictionary, and the other one's user profile. So these are encapsulated sort of large, complex components, but they're there, and they will maintain on the front end framework. It also supports all the theming configuration functions. So, things like selecting your colors, selecting your fonts, and how you turn on and off various features are handled by it. Custom content, we'll talk about how that gets integrated as well. As mentioned before, our components are built using Mantine, and so we can provide, it's very easy to look at what we'll provide a guide of what Mantine components we use. And so you'll have an understanding of how they work. And as I said, it's been a very good development library to work UI library to work with. So we're pretty happy about with it. And then we'll of course use it also uses all the Gen3 services and accesses data via the Gen3 framework hooks. So as a result of using the hooks, it will that's the way we abstract the data access, and we can isolate ourselves from changes and be more it will make our development or the ability to extend the framework going forward. The front end going forward much simpler. Next slide, please. Yeah, so basically, this is now moving on to the concept of what does it mean for me? What does it mean for me running a data commons? And so one of the things about it is that we're gonna migrate the code that you want for specific code that's for you and for what's domain specific to your commons, that you can implement that in your own functionality, your own code, so you can use it to retrieve, transform, and render data. So all the features except a function hook that will override default behavior. So we'll provide standard ways to access data through Gen3 services, data. We'll provide hooks that are compatible with the current sort of how Data Portal works now. So we're starting from Data Portal and what functionality it has in that, and then we'll be able to expand that going forward. So we'll provide these default functions, and I'll describe, and I have an example one coming up to explain how that works. As I said, the hooks are implemented to provide the standard behavior that you've seen now. Things like tables and charts can be customized by registering custom cell rendering chart components. So you can take tables that we have, and you can say, yeah, this data column needs this sort of data transformation before I can render it, or I'd like to have like a badge or some sort of representation on there. You can do that and register these simple rendering functions that will let you customize how these work. And then of course what we're going to do is provide templates for both how to implement a hook, how to implement an analysis tool, and provide developer documentation, which probably later on in the process we have some working ones now that needs to be expanded, but we'll be expanding that as we're doing the development of the front-end framework. Next slide, please. So talking about the hook, go through a quick example. So in Data Portal right now, our discovery page reads data from the Gen3 metadata service. We actually have two. There's the metadata service, and we have something called the aggregate metadata service, which has the ability to aggregate data from a number of commons and serve that up as a single service. So the Data Portal right now, depending on how it's configured, will pull data from the metadata service and combine with the aggregate metadata service, or just one of the two, or some combination of that. So right now, as I mentioned, Data Portal can be somewhat complex to configure. And so one of the problems is the complexity and variety of the metadata makes this configuration somewhat complex. I mean, we've done a great job with how we've configured the discovery page, but it can be somewhat more complex to configure, and sometimes it doesn't work quite right. So you have to play around with the configuration in order to get stuff right. And then one of the downsides is right now, it's a feature or a bug, depending on how you look at it. All the metadata is loaded into the client to support search. So right now you have discovery page will load in the data. You can do all the client search, and that's great, except if it gets huge, it might be somewhat slower than we like. So the front-end framework implemented a discovery page, but we provide the standard hook to pull data as the Data Portal does. But the advantage is that you can also pass a function to load transform data any way you want to. And so what this does is enable data transformation logic to be common specific. So this moves our logic for processing metadata that we display on the discovery page And you're free to use the one we have, and it has lots of configurations. So maybe it works perfectly out of the box, but if it's something you want to transform, you can add in your own hook, or in combination with the hook we have, or write your own. And that makes the ability to add data discovery much more common specific. Next slide, please. So kind of how this works is that discovery, if you look at the discovery page, is composed of a variety of different components that all need data. And so this would be advanced search, be the search bar, or key value search. Those are the types of search we do. We also provide optional summary or aggregations on top of the page. We have a table full of results, and we have pagination, which lets you go through the various pages. So in the case of what we have now, whereas everything's loaded, basically the data hook says, I'm going to load all the data, and then I'll turn it over the table, and the table can do all the searching and pagination, all that locally on the client. You could change that, and you could say, okay, I really want server-side search, and I really want server-side pagination. So you provide a different data hook, and we'll describe, how this would look, but it would basically go out, get the data. It would be able to take in parameters for how you like it. The data hook would take not only the current table pagination information, but also what's in the search bar, the key value search, and the advanced search as inputs. Go request the data from the metadata service, bring back, transform in any ways it needs to, maybe doesn't need to do anything at all, aggregate any data that's in for data aggregations, so those can be displayed on that, and then provide all the remaining data to the table. And so that way you have the ability to open up the it opens up the ability to do a lot more with your data than you could do before. Next slide, please. The other one I talked about is trying to do renders with cells, and I'm showing code here because we just want to show how it can happen. So for example, we have I want to render badges, and I want to do one for just to mark the test name. Now they're all COVID-19, so not a very interesting example, but it's there. The other one is test result text, which is negative positive. So if I want positive to be green, then I want the badge to be green, I can do that. So basically what you end up doing is you would write your own, you provide your own function that would basically say, I need to render a cell. So I get the data, and you can transform any you want to. I can use man-time components here, which would give me a badge or whatever I want to. This is an example of this is being shown. And then what you would do is you'd register it. So basically we provide hooks or functions to register custom cell renderers. And the nice thing is they become a catalog. So you can say for string values, I want to use a wrap string cell, which basically says just wrap it and display it. But for Boolean values, I'm going to use this link study cell, and this is specific to my data, but it's in there. And then I register it. And then when I use the configuration, I say, okay, when I see test results text, I'm going to treat it as a Boolean, and by the way, and then I want you to render it with a link study cell. And so you add that to configuration. Sorry, I didn't throw the configuration here, but that's what you do. And we'll have documentation to explain this. And then you can sort of add your own cell renderers. So each of your each of the components can have their own way of rendering data, and it's just set in the configuration. So it's a little code you provide on your commons, but then once you do this, you have the ability to do custom renders. We'll provide a fairly large, extensive library of various different ones out of the box. But if you have something you need to tailor, it should be very straightforward to do. Next slide, please. Because we're starting with a new framework, we have the ability to do a bunch of new features. So one thing we're looking into is a common location for storing selection. This is more along the context. We call it my data library. Think of it as cart, but cart's a little different. This has some functionality that we're talking about and debating now. But the idea is that you could select something and put it in your library, and then it becomes available to any page across the site, and you have immediate access to it, just like you would at a standard site where you would have a cart. You click the icon, you can see what's selected, and you can do management of that from that page. As we mentioned several times, analysis tool plugins. Because we're using Next.js, we do have the ability to provide support for static content. You have a lot of documentation. You have a lot of content you want to maintain, add to your site. It's very straightforward to add. We can add the support for doing custom pages, so you can have your own pages. We can do content via Markdown if you just want to have something very simple to edit. Do that. As I said, we added context. We're updating the site navigation, providing a couple of different options is our plan. We'll have one that's compatible with existing Gen 3 now for now, but we do have newer ones. Have some new UI design that we're working on to improve just the overall information display and flow throughout the entire site. And we're trying to be web accessible, 508 compliant, built in as we're going forward. Next slide, please. So as I said, new design, new UX. So exploring the possibility of doing navigation on the left side, or navigation along the top with different iconography, various different ways. We'll support, as I said, the current design that we have now for Gen 3. We'll provide a couple different alternatives, and if you want something completely radically different, we can try to figure out how to do that. But that's what we're hoping for. Next slide, please. And other things have happened, like the profile page will have a new design, new abilities to look at the resource browser, hopefully be straightforward, more sort of cleaner design, the ability to collapse things. So more efficient management and space management, and hopefully easier to find objects on the profile page as an example. Next slide, please. We're redesigning the data dictionary, hopefully to make it a little more well, visually better, more interesting information layout, better examples for doing searches, and overall an improvement on how we display things. Next slide, please. Same thing with the Explorer page. You can see where the COVID-19 and that example came from. So a more advanced Explorer page, standard way of doing facet search. This will probably go over some redesign because we have tabs going this way and tabs going this way, but we will do some redesign on that. One thing we have also added is sort of the query representation on top. They also stay persistent. So if you switch between different indexes, they will stay persistent when you come back. So you can actually keep those selections, and then you will eventually be able to save them to your library and then use them as part of, in the future, or for an analysis tool that could take advantage of those. Next slide, please. So once again, I mentioned that we use Next.js. That gives us some ability to do some things that we haven't been able to do before. So it's an application server for the Gen 3 Commons. We implement all the front-end modules as standard Gen 3 features. And what I basically mean by that is all the pages are implemented. There's a little bit of a trick with Next.js and how it handles pages. So we're using a little bit of a trick to get this to work. And I'll explain that later, but it seems to be working fine. And I don't participate in any problems with that. And of course, we'll provide support for access control pages and even page sections. So you could have something that, don't go to this page unless I'm logged in, or you could even have it so don't display this part of the page because I'm not logged in. And we'll provide all that. We'll provide analysis for registration with the ATF, and that'll be this plugin architecture we're hoping to do. The other advantages, it enables things like complex site navigation and middleware support that you can add in if you need to. If you need to do something interesting, as data is being pulled from the back end or anything else, that gives you the ability to do that. It also has support, which we're exploring, to do things like server-side rendering of pages. So your payload's a lot smaller. It should be fairly simple to set up. We'll try to support as much stuff out of the box as possible, so you don't have to worry about it. But it gives you the ability to be a little more flexible on how your comments, how do you configure comments, how you run them. Next slide, please. So site configuration. Built into Gen 3 front end, so that's all the different configurations. We're supporting file-based configurations, which is kind of how we use it for Data Portal. We have the getops.json file, which allows you configuration of everything. Maybe in the future we can do database stored configurations, or my favorite, which we've not done, but introspection in Gen 3 services. So basically on how your Gen 3 service is configured, it will pick up a configuration. They'll configure the front end based on that. That, of course, is future. So do not expect it in an early release, but it'll be something I think we would like to be able to support. We probably will split the configurations for each page application into a separate config library. GitOps tends to get really large, hard to navigate, but that's my own personal preference. I'm open to any suggestion, but that's kind of where I think it makes sense, because then if you don't have a service you don't need, for instance, you don't need the data dictionary page, you don't even provide a configuration, you don't have to worry about it at all. We plan to be backwards compatible with Data Portal. So Data Portal GitOps.json will support we'll try to support every single configuration in there. It definitely will silently ignore things that you can't support, but eventually we'll be able to support those. But then the idea is we'll extend that and we'll add new capabilities to those configurations, and so we'll be able to expand upon what we can do with the Gen3 Frontend Framework while still being compatible with what we've done in the past. What I'd like to be able to do is, and this is of course down the road, is web-based configuration and validation. So you do a configuration, it will actually validate it before you deploy. So you will not have to, you won't run into unpleasant surprises when you spun up your commons. Planned a hybrid Data Portal Gen3 Frontend Framework. Actually, we kind of have that working now. So one of our projects, Heal, uses the Gen3 a sort of separate branch of the Gen3 Frontend Framework for the landing page, and everything else is a Data Portal. One thing we will want to do is probably provide that gives us the ability to slowly, for things that the Gen3 Frontend Framework can't support yet, you could use them in Data Portal, and we can navigate between the two. Still working on the authentication details, but that actually doesn't seem too bad. So that is something we want to try to do to sort of allow us to give you a functioning commons sooner, even if part of it is using Data Portal. Next slide, please. And the last major piece, of course, and I probably mentioned all of this, but the web application framework, and that's a little different. So the other two will end up being published as NPM packages, but the last one will actually be stored as a Git repo that you or a template, and we're working on those that you'll be able to fork from and use that as a new repo. So the advantage as a data common now is each data commons will have its own repository, which means that it can support all the configurations, its icon, custom codes and pages, and content can all be done within the same GitHub repository. As we do push changes to the front end components and the framework, you'll just pick up a new package, and that should be compatible, and we'll make sure it's compatible. And because if you use templates or even fork from it, we'll be able to push changes to the application framework if we have done those to you as well. Things like, Next.js upgrades or various different tech stack upgrades that we want to do. Also, as a result, since it's now in each commons in its own GitHub repository, adding additional pages becomes somewhat simpler because it's fairly straightforward to add a page to Next.js. You can do it as pages, something called a slug, which is an ID that lets you do things based on an ID, or Markdown, and then all your register analysis tools can also be there as well, your configuration for those, or even your tools. Next slide, please. So yeah, and then the idea is majorly trying to support custom content analysis tools. I know I've said analysis tools lots, but we really are excited about trying to be able to do those. So we want to be able to give the ability to add custom pages. So you could use, just straight HTML, React, or in any number of its forms. Markdown support. You can build your own components, or we can provide components you can build for, and then you can build your own analysis tools using React and the Gen3 modules, such as both framework and front end. Next slide, please. Color theming we're supporting. So, and this is somewhat opinionated, and we're open to suggestions, and we can do it, is that we're using a color token based on the US web standard developed by the US federal government. And so the idea is we have color tokens, and this is some of the examples. So we have primary, secondary accent. The idea is that you do things within like a 20, 30, 10%. So, 70% or 70% of your content is primary, 20 is secondary, 10% is accent, some variation of that. So we have command line tools, and we can actually make them so they'll work. So you define your base colors for these, your primary, secondary accent colors, and it will actually create the various different shading of them. And it will provide what we call contrasting colors. So they will make sure that they're all 508 compliant in terms of the contrast and readable. So web accessibility standards will be followed. And we use these color tokens exclusively in Gen3 front-end pages. Oops. Yes. So the question was, if each commons has its own repository, it's a previous, are you planning to use a template tool? Like, yes. Yeah, we are exploring what we're going to use to be able to do that, but that would be the idea. And so we can have a template tool that would let us start you off with the commons, and then you start adding to it and expanding from there. So we use a color tokenization through the site. If it ends up becoming too opinionated, we're definitely can change that. But the idea, we've had other projects in which we've done this, and it seems to work fairly well. And there are ways to do changes if you absolutely need to, but that's kind of our plan for that. Next slide, please. And then development. So you want to develop a commons. So we've been moving towards Gen3 Helm charts for doing local development. So that lets you spin up all the relative Gen3 services. What we are aiming towards and have some success, and we're continuing to refine this, is so you would spin up a Helm chart, have your data loaded. So you'd have your local cluster running somewhere. Your commons would run. So you're in development mode. You'd run your commons just as a node development, a Next.js development server, which is basically just running it in development mode. And then you would be able to locally look at your site, and that nicely supports things like hot reloading and debugging with breakpoints depending on your IDE. We want to be able to have we want to plan to support debugging commons. So basically, hey, I have a commons and now I want to locally develop. So I'm going to point towards that and grab the data and be able to run locally using the remote APIs. And then we will provide sample Helm configurations and tools to run local development environments, help you get things set up, help you hopefully with certificates and authentication and anything else you might need, and of course documentation to support development of your site. Next slide, please. So the question would be always, what's available now and what's in progress and where are we? So I'd say at this point we have a discovery page. Everything has an asterisk that not everything's completely done. So like we need downloads on discovery page, which we don't have working yet, but we're rapidly getting towards those by the end of the year. We have query page, we have login working, still working on that. Profile works. We have theming support in there, and we have configuration support starting. But we have various different things we need to do. So hopefully by the end of this year, we will have Discovery Explorer, profile page, and the data dictionary mostly done. So those will be available. And then things like styling and theming, local development support, the template for the GitHub repo, and then authentication support, so it's compliant with how we have currently used data, which is things like timeout, obviously session refresh, and then the hybrid authentication, which I mentioned, if we decide to run both data portal and the front-end framework sort of in hybrid mode, where one is a subset of the other, we want to make sure that authentication works. So you log in one side, you want to make sure it works across the entire site. Early Q1 of 2024, we'll support workspaces. We'll get them up. We'll have the analysis tools started. We'll try to do some demos about that early. The My Data Library or the cart will start, and I don't believe it will take as long as it shows up here. Continue to, and things are not on here, things to continue refinement. We'll add unit testing and more testing framework, which we don't have much of right now, but we were working towards that. And then after we get a majority of that done, we'll start working on workflows that we've developed for various different commons, but have not included into our yet. They are down the road. hopefully when we have the hybrid mode working, that will not be a problem if you want to use Data Portal for those. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, I haven't gone too long. We're trying to develop this to overcome current limitations in Data Portal, but also to enrich the user experience, to make development and deployment much, much simpler, provide large options for customization, and that's just not with theming and branding, but also with the type of data transformations, how I pull data, how I load data, various things about that. And hopefully facilitate complex data analysis workflows and make it a good experience for not only doing exploration, but true data science within a Gen3 Commons. And that's our hope, that's our goal, and we are striving towards that. Next slide, please. Yeah. So I'm open for questions if anyone has any, and or comments, and we can go from there.
Thanks, Craig. This is really exciting to see. Just quickly thinking on that slide, the speakers, Craig and Bob, and the steering committee members. So yeah, please ask questions if you have any.
I have a quick question. Craig, you presented a lot of material. Could you just summarize the two things, the 3 or 4 major benefits of this? Forget how it was built, but what are the 3 or 4 major benefits? And second, what are the sort of part of this is to make it more convenient for each group to bring up their own commons and manage it. Can you talk how that's done through separate GitHub repositories? But just summarize very briefly the main benefits and how people are going to sort of organize their code in this new place.
Happy to do it. So the vision is that what we're trying to enable is just a more dynamic, sort of integrated experience. One of the things I about the current Data Portal is that, as I said, like moving data from page to page or using analysis seems to be very everything's monolithic. So I build something in Explorer, but then I have to download it or save a manifest before I use it someplace else, and it becomes harder to do. And if I select something on Discovery page and transfer to Workspace, I don't know necessarily what I got. Some definitely improvements to UX, but the whole idea is to make the Gen3 portal seem more unified, more integrated. And so with the hope of adding analysis tools in your own custom content, it gives that ability to sort of expand and let you do more than what you could do, but also in a much more integrated, dynamic way than we've been able to do in the past. So that's the advantages of that. In terms of how our new vision of deployment works is it will let you make changes. It'll let you start with a very good core of what we provide from Gen3, but it'll also give you the ability to add things in to your own comments. I have my own page. I want to be able to do, a different landing page. I want a landing page that looks different than what Gen3 provides. So I can now do that, and it's not a problem to actually configure that and to get that to work. And our hope is that as we develop analysis tools, then you'll be able to use the analysis tools. It'd be great to have a nice ecosystem of analysis tools that are all Gen3 sort of compliant, and you can use them as you want. We'd love to be able to have a really rich community providing not only contributions to the Gen3 Frontend Framework, but also through the analysis tools, and be able to do that. And these are features that I think will definitely enrich what you can do, the capabilities, and it gives you the ability to do things for it's sort of the base. We provide a strong framework for you to build something that is actually really tailored to what you need and what your users are and what your data is.
Thank you.
We got a question from the OHSU group, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, thanks. It looks great. was wondering in terms of the data hooks to integrate non-Gen3 services on the back end. I was wondering if you've worked out or have any insights into if they exist on a different host or in a different domain, or making sure authentication passes, or any.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, pulling data from other services would be fine. Now, authentication would be, you know, we'd have to see. Like if it's a Gen3 Commons and we generate access tokens, we can do it. You could possibly pass them that way. Would need to think about how you support that, and we're not going to wash our hands and go, well, that's your problem. You deal with it. No, we do need to figure that out, how we'd actually do security, and we have not broached that yet, but we would like, we definitely need to have support for that.
Phil Shum has a question.
Yeah, Craig, very, very impressive work. This is Christmas coming early. I have an easy and uninteresting question and a harder and more interesting question. The easy one, I apologize if you said something and I missed it, but if you could just comment really briefly on responsiveness with this framework. And then the more interesting question is, I expect that a lot of the people who are going to be interested in writing their own custom components are not going to be, TypeScript developers, but they're going to be, data scientists who are familiar with using, Python tools to plot data or, those kinds of things. I'm sure you've thought about it, but can you share just a little bit about how, basically what those folks are going to ultimately have available in terms of being able to take things that they write in environments they're comfortable with and then basically use them with the new front end?
Yeah, I mean, that would have to be like things like notebooks that we'd support, but hopefully with context, we'll be able to make that be more powerful than what we have now in terms of getting data in and out. Yeah, so that'd be the one thing. And then your first part of the question, I'm sorry, I wrote it down.
Responsiveness.
Oh, responsiveness. Yeah, I mean, so you mean like responsiveness to like changing data, or just how fast the site is overall?
Oh, no. I meant, on your phone or your tablet that's, smaller form factor, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh, I know what you mean. Yes. We definitely will try to support that. So, we'll have responsive web layouts. So, they should hopefully, if you have a giant wide monitor or a giant tall monitor, or as you said, a tablet or a phone, they will be able to be responsive to that, that profile. That is something that will happen. I will say it's probably going to be, early on, it's not going to be perfect. So, and you said Christmas comes early. We have definitely pieces working. We just need to continue working and push that forward. But that is what that's our intention, is to support that. So
there's a question in the chat.
yeah, early access to the code. So right now, the code is in a private repo. Our hope is to have like, by supercomputing, and that is coming up, but is to have some ability to publish like a sample commons and then have people use that as just to play with, even just configuration, and maybe point to a discovery page and have some sample data and load it, run a Helm chart with some data and see how that works. And so that would be what I hope to do. One of the problems right now, and what we probably end up doing for supercomputing is so in our own development environment, we have everything as a mono repo, right? So basically we have the framework, we have the front end, and we have a sample commons that you can play with. That's all integrated. So it's not like you've forked off your own repo or anything. Probably we'll do that initially. And then I'll set up, as soon as we have a chance to set up the repo and come up with the technology we want to use for doing that, we'll set that up and have that available as well. But that's the plan. We'll have a short term, hey, you can play around in our true mono repo, and then we can go for the real sample commons. Hopefully by the end of the year is my hope.
I had a question, Craig.
Yes.
Um, what kind of guidance will we give people who want to migrate from data portal to the front end framework?
Our hope is to be compatible. That's a slippery slope though. And the reason why, I mean, it's not, that's the hope. In reality, what we'll try to do is support everything we can. I said the configurations hopefully will be that. We hope to provide migration tools so you can take your GitOps and then, have it split out and get it set up and use. The one worry I have is that there's a lot of, there's probably a lot of things that we'll miss initially, that some pages can do that work well for one project and don't work well for others, which is the business logic was put into that for that commons, and then it might not work as expected, and so we'd have to figure that out. But I'm hoping to make it. We hope to make it so it's not a horrible experience, and it mostly works out of the box. But I will say, because we're early in on it, probably can't cover everything, but that's our intention, is to get as much compatibility with commons as possible. During our development, we're using commons to test things out to make sure they work. Because we have a number of commons that we have that have various different, that use various different components, and so we want to make sure they all work to some extent. So.
But also a related question, which I think you mostly answered, but that both will be supported for some time.
Yeah, we're still adding stuff to data portal, and that's just because it's the nature of what we have. We have commitments. We want to make sure that data portal will be around for a while. It's impossible. It just is not likely to stop that. But what we want to do is we want to have a nice alternative that people can either migrate their site over to over time, or start new projects with the new front-end framework and have never looked at data portal. But yeah, it'll definitely be a transition period. And be honest with you, I don't know how long that would be. Within a year, I'd love a year from now to say, okay, we have everything working and data portal is going away, and we'll end of life it at some point, and we definitely will. It's just a matter of how much we can get, what we get done in the front end framework and what it all supports. But
I just want to emphasize, people sometimes get funding to create commons. They get a lot less funding for sustainability of commons. So even though we will start to build new commons and move all the commons CTDS that our center does to the new front end framework, each organization could make their own decisions about this. The front end framework, I'm sorry, the current data portal will be around for a while. We're not going to orphan anyone. We'll listen to the community, and over time, hopefully people will transition. We may try to gain some resources to help the transition, but we don't want anyone to worry. This is going to take a while, and we're not going to orphan commons. That's not how you treat commons.
yeah, no, there's no intention of doing that. As I said, we're actively adding code and doing things for data portal, and every project that is using data portal is actually being developed, using data portal. The front end framework is just going to be, a way going forward it's our vision going forward, how we're going to adapt and add a lot more capability and make it a more pleasant and more integrated experience going forward. But it doesn't mean we're walking away from data portal at all.
Any other questions?
Oh, there's one there. So there's a question on the chat. I can answer that one. Like to work from the low-hanging fruit, right? Can we put thumbnail on the discovery page and work outward from there as a way to develop pathways through the complexity going forward? Yeah, there is. We'll have the ability. I want to be able to make it pretty easy to say, hey, I want to add something simple to a table. That should be low-hanging fruit and very straightforward to do. The sample commons will have some. In times of supercomputing, we'll have an example of how The sample comments can register a table cell render or a row render, and then be able to, hey, I have this data, now I wanted to show this, and so be able to do that, or a custom chart or something like that. We'd like to be able to show that. So it's clear that it's pretty straightforward to do if you want to. So yeah, that would be one thing I'd like to do in terms of like supporting, back to Phil's question about supporting like Python and analysis tools. I mean, I'd love to do something beyond notebooks, and I think there might be ways. I don't know what technologies out there, but we'd like to be able to support that. Right now, there's like, to get on the web, it has to probably be written in TypeScript or some version that the web can render, but it doesn't mean necessarily that we can't provide some hooks into other abilities to show things. But at least in terms of customization, we can do that. We might be able to do some through Markdown as well, which we haven't explored, but could possibly do that to make it even simpler.
Any other questions?
So just to recap, Supercomputing is the third week of November. We'll be showing hopefully some core thing that works, you can play with, and more and more functionality will come out. Should be hopefully sometime in January some baby working commons, and then we'll add to this. We're working with the community in a couple different ways you'll hear about over time to sort of get a firm. We're trying to get the community to develop analysis tools that will fit into this framework. So the idea is that we will sort of wrap a few tools so that you have a much richer set of tools, so that you have a richer set of tools for analysis. But we're going to try to encourage the community to wrap their own tools and to develop tools for this and a similar framework. So that's part of the strategy here. So it's just not you developing for your own organizations, but there's a sort of a critical mass of tools developed that fit into this type of analysis tool framework that is surrounded by a front-end framework. I think there was a question about Vega or Vega Lite that came in.
Yeah, we can, I mean, any suggestions that anyone gives us, happy to look into, see how we can integrate it, see what the effort is, and if it's something that we can do. Yeah, I'd definitely like to. I mean, this is one reason why we're showing this now, is that, hey, give feedback if someone has ideas about something they'd like to see in there, or something we should consider, or a hole we haven't, or something we missed. I'm happy to definitely look and consider all options.
Any other questions? If people have a specific suggestion for the next form, please forward it. Michael, you want to put in the chat if they have suggestions where they send it, I guess a Slack channel or whatever.
You could send it in Gen3 community, or you could email it to me directly. I think everybody should be able to find me pretty easily, but my email is fitz@uchicago.edu.
If people are at Supercomputing, please stop by, and we'll show you this in our booth. Both the University of Chicago Center for Translational Data Science and the Open Commons Consortium have, I think for 10 years now, shared a booth at Supercomputing, and so we show off the latest technology. Also, we were updating our Powered by Gen3 page. So if you're developing a commons that you'd like to list there, please let us know, and we can put you on the Powered by Gen3 page and keep your statistics up to date. If there are no more questions, we'll return a little bit of time, but you'll be hearing more and more about this framework over the, I think over the next couple of months. And I think from the viewpoint of having a third party, that is having an organization bring up their own commons, add to it, operate multiple commons with an operations center. It's just not the front end framework. It's a little bit of refactoring of how local commons keep their local commons code in a GitHub repository. So it's a little easier for you to make changes on your own and maintain those over time. So that's part of what's going on with this beginning of Gen 3.2. Okay. Well, thanks again for coming to the forum. Send us your suggestions, and you know, for those people who it's morning, have a good day, and for those people who it's the end of the day, have a good evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.